Captain Lee Hana stood at the tactical console of the human defense vessel Resilience. Her fingers moved across the holographic displays as she studied enemy movement patterns from last week's training exercise. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of the ship's engines and the occasional beep from monitoring stations. "Still playing with your theories, Hana?" Lieutenant Kim Sora walked over with a smirk on her face. "You know those fancy ideas won't work in real combat." Hana looked up from her screen. "The simulation data shows that adaptive formations could increase our survival rate by 30%. Simulations. Sora laughed and shook her head. "Real space battles aren't won by gut feelings and pretty dance moves. They're won by following proven tactics and superior firepower." The other bridge officers turned to watch. Hana had heard this conversation many times before. Ever since she graduated from the Terran Naval Academy 6 months ago, her crewmates had treated her ideas like jokes. They called her combat theories, emotional guesswork, and primitive thinking. Commander Park Jinwoo entered the bridge from his ready room. He was a tall man with gray hair and cold eyes. He had been fighting space battles for 20 years and believed only in traditional Galactic Federation military doctrine. "Officer Lee," he said in his stern voice, "I hope you're reviewing standard battle protocols and not wasting time on those unusual theories of yours." "Sir, I was analyzing how human intuition could improve our response times during combat." Hana stood at attention. "The data suggests that our natural pattern recognition abilities give us advantages that current tactics don't use." Park's expression grew darker. "Pattern recognition? Officer Lee, modern warfare is about calculations, not feelings. We use computers and proven strategies because they work. Human intuition got people killed back when we fought with swords and arrows." Several crew members chuckled. Hana felt her cheeks grow warm but kept her voice steady. "Sir, with respect, human intuition evolved over thousands of years of survival. It might be more sophisticated than we think." "Sophisticated?" Lieutenant Choi Minho stepped forward. He was Hana's direct superior and never missed a chance to put her down. "Hana, you graduated top of your class because you memorized textbooks well. But this is real military service. We can't risk lives on your hunches." The bridge fell silent. Everyone stared at Hana. She had faced this mockery every day since joining the crew. Her academy instructors had praised her innovative thinking. But here in actual service, innovation was seen as dangerous foolishness. "I understand your concerns, sir," Hana said quietly. "But the Academy War Games showed that ships using flexible, intuitive tactics survived longer than those following rigid patterns." "War Games." Minho shook his head. "Those were controlled exercises with known parameters. Real enemies don't follow the rules. They use every advantage to destroy you as quickly as possible." Captain Otaewan's voice came through the communication system. "All vessels, this is Admiral Ryu Deho. Report to your stations for fleet coordination drill. We're practicing standard Federation defensive formations." Hana moved to her position at the tactical display. The Resilience was part of a 12-ship patrol group protecting the Outer Rim colonies. These were humanity's newest settlements, built on worlds far from Earth where families hoped to start fresh lives. As the drill began, Hana watched the human ships move into perfect geometric formations. Each vessel took its assigned position based on size, firepower, and defensive capabilities. The formation looked impressive on the tactical display, like a textbook illustration. But Hana noticed something troubling. The ships moved in predictable patterns that any enemy could analyze and counter. Their spacing was mathematically precise but inflexible. If an enemy attacked from an unexpected angle or used unusual tactics, the formation would struggle to adapt. "Sir," she said to Minho, "what if an enemy doesn't attack the formation's strong points? What if they come from below and focus on the support vessels? Then we follow Protocol 7 and shift to defensive posture B4, Minho replied without looking up from his console. "Every possible scenario has been studied and planned for. But what if the enemy uses tactics we haven't studied? What if they move in ways our protocols don't account for?" Minho finally turned to look at her. His expression was annoyed. "Officer Lee, the Galactic Federation has been fighting space battles for 300 years. Every possible tactic has been tried and countered. There are no surprises left in warfare." Hana wanted to argue but knew it was pointless. She had tried many times to explain her ideas about human combat instincts and natural fighting abilities. Her crewmates always responded the same way. They believed that human intuition was primitive and unreliable compared to computer analysis and mathematical calculations. The drill continued for 2 hours. The human fleet practiced standard maneuvers while Hana quietly ran her own simulations. She imagined how the ships might move if they followed more natural patterns, like flocks of birds or schools of fish. These formations would be harder to predict and could adapt quickly to changing threats. Her simulation showed promising results, but she knew better than to share them. The last time she had presented alternative tactical ideas, Commander Park had assigned her to maintenance duty for a week as punishment for wasting everyone's time with fantasies. After the drill ended, Hana remained at her station while other officers left for their meal break. She continued studying battle data, looking for patterns that might support her theories. The Academy had taught her that human beings had unique advantages in warfare, but her crewmates seemed determined to ignore those advantages. Still working, Hana? Sora returned with a food tray. You know, if you spent less time on impossible theories and more time learning real tactics, you might actually become useful. I'm trying to find ways to keep us alive if we face a superior enemy, Hana replied. The best way to stay alive is to follow orders and trust proven methods. Sora sat down at her console. Your problem is that you think you're smarter than 3 centuries of military experience. Hana looked out at the stars through the bridge's main view screen. Somewhere out there, unknown dangers waited. She had a feeling that humanity's traditional methods might not be enough when the battle turned into a nightmare for the human fleet. Hana watched in horror as the Velith ships moved through space like deadly phantoms, appearing and disappearing at will. Their weapons cut through human vessels like knives through paper, while return fire passed harmlessly through their transparent hulls. The Valor is taking heavy damage, Sora reported from her station. Hull breach on decks 4 through 7. They're requesting immediate assistance. But there was no help to give. The human fleet was scattered and desperate, each ship fighting for its own survival against an enemy they could barely touch. The Velith moved in patterns that seemed random, but deadly effective, striking weak points with surgical precision. Lieutenant Song Minji's voice came through the communication system, filled with static and fear. This is Corvette Dawn. We're losing power and life support is failing. Request permission to abandon ship. Negative, Dawn, Admiral Ryu replied through gritted teeth. Maintain position and continue firing. We don't abandon our posts. Hana felt sick watching the tactical display. The small corvette was clearly doomed, its engines dead and hull cracking under alien fire. But military protocol demanded that the crew stay and fight until the end, even when fighting was useless. A Velith destroyer materialized directly above the Dawn and fired a single energy beam. The corvette exploded in a brilliant flash that left nothing but debris and cooling plasma. Song Minji and her crew of 30 were gone in an instant. Dawn is destroyed, Sora reported, her voice barely a whisper. No survivors detected. Commander Park stood rigid at his command position, staring at the tactical display with cold fury. All stations maintain defensive fire. Follow Protocol 15 and concentrate on the nearest enemy vessel. The Resilience joined 3 other human ships in focusing their weapons on a single Velith cruiser. Laser cannons and missile salvos converged on the target, creating a spectacular light show against the darkness of space. For a moment, it seemed like the concentrated firepower might penetrate the alien defenses. Then the Velith ship simply became transparent. Every human weapon passed through its ghostly hull without causing any damage. The alien vessel remained in position for several seconds, mockingly solid except when human weapons tried to strike it. It's impossible, Minho said, his confidence finally cracking. How can they control matter at the molecular level? Their technology is centuries beyond ours. Hana studied the enemy ship carefully. Something about its behavior patterns caught her attention. The vessel didn't become transparent randomly. There was a rhythm to its phase shifts like breathing or a heartbeat. She began timing the intervals between solid and ghost states. Sir, she said to Commander Park, I think their phasing ability has limitations. They seem to need recovery time between shifts. What kind of recovery time? Park asked without taking his eyes off the battle. Approximately 3 to 4 seconds when they're under heavy fire. Longer periods when they're not being attacked. Hana's fingers moved across her console recording data. If we could coordinate our attacks perfectly, we might hit them during their solid phases. Park considered this for a moment. Even if you're right, How do we coordinate 15 ships to fire at the exact same instant? The communication delays alone would make precise timing impossible. The battle continued its deadly course. Captain Otewin's dreadnought Defiance suffered catastrophic damage when 3 Valeth fighters phased directly through its hull and fired from inside the ship's structure. The massive vessel broke apart in sections, each piece spinning away into the void with emergency lights flickering like dying stars. "Defiance is gone," Sora reported. Captain Tewin and 800 crew members lost. The human fleet was dying ship by ship. Standard Federation tactics that had worked for centuries proved utterly useless against an enemy that could ignore physical matter at will. Every human vessel was trapped in rigid formations that made them easy targets for weapons that struck from impossible angles. Hana watched the Valeth ships move through space and noticed something else. Their flight patterns weren't just random. They flowed like water around obstacles, curving and spiraling in ways that reminded her of something familiar. She had seen these movements before, but where? "Their formation flying," she murmured, studying the tactical display. "It's not mechanical. It's organic." "What are you talking about now?" Minho snapped. His nerves were clearly fraying as the battle went badly for humanity. "The way they move together, sir. It's like a flock of birds or a school of fish. Natural patterns, not calculated ones." Hana's excitement grew as she recognized the connections. "That's why our computer targeting systems can't predict their movements. They're not following mathematical algorithms." "So what if they're not?" Park barked. "It doesn't matter how they move if we can't hit them when they're solid." But Hana's mind was racing now. If the Valeth moved according to natural patterns rather than calculated ones, then perhaps human intuition could predict their behavior better than computer analysis. Her academy training in pattern recognition suddenly seemed relevant in ways she had never imagined. The cruiser Steadfast exploded under concentrated alien fire, adding another 200 names to the growing list of casualties. Admiral Ryu's flagship was taking heavy damage, its shields flickering under repeated strikes from Valeth weapons that phased through armor and struck vital systems directly. "All ships fall back to defensive position Delta," the Admiral ordered. "Prepare for fighting withdrawal toward the jump point." The human fleet began an organized retreat, but the Valeth pursued them like wolves hunting wounded prey. Their ships darted in and out of visibility, striking at stragglers and damaged vessels with ruthless efficiency. Each attack was perfectly timed to cause maximum damage while avoiding human counterfire. Hana continued studying the alien movement patterns even as the Resilience shook under enemy fire. The Valeth formations reminded her of traditional Korean dances she had learned as a child. Flowing movements that seemed chaotic to outsiders, but followed ancient rhythms understood by the participants. "Commander," she said urgently, "what if we tried moving like they do? Instead of rigid formations, we could flow and adapt like natural creatures." Park's response was immediate and harsh. "Officer Lee, this is not the time for your experimental theories. We're fighting for our lives using proven military doctrine." "But the doctrine isn't working, sir. We're being slaughtered because we're predictable. The enemy knows exactly where we'll be and what we'll do next." "Enough!" Park shouted. "Return to your duties and stop wasting time on impossible ideas." The destroyer Courage managed to score a hit on a Valeth fighter during one of its solid phases. The alien ship staggered under the impact, its hull showing visible damage for the first time in the battle. But 3 more Valeth vessels immediately surrounded the human destroyer and destroyed it with overwhelming firepower. "They don't like being hurt," Hana observed quietly. "When one of them takes damage, the others protect it. They care about their individual ships." The retreat continued, but it was clearly a losing battle. The human fleet had lost 6 ships already, with several more badly damaged. The Valeth pressed their attack with mechanical precision, showing no signs of fatigue or concern for casualties. As the Resilience limped toward the rally point where survivors would attempt to regroup, Hana made a decision that would change everything. She quietly began programming her experimental tactical algorithms into a separate computer system, preparing for a chance to prove that human intuition might succeed where mathematical precision had failed. The Resilience drifted through space with its engines running at minimum power. The ship's hull bore scorch marks from Valeth energy weapons, and several sections showed signs of emergency repairs. In the main computer core, Hana worked alone while the rest of the crew tried to rest between battle alerts. She had been analyzing battle recordings for 6 hours straight. Her eyes burned from staring at tactical displays, but she couldn't stop. Something important was hidden in the data, something that might save human lives if she could find it. The coffee in her cup had grown cold hours ago, but she barely noticed. Computer. Replay Valeth attack pattern from timestamp 1437, she said quietly. The holographic display showed alien ships moving through space in their strange flowing formations. Hana watched them phase in and out of solid matter, while destroying human vessels with deadly precision. She had seen these recordings dozens of times, but now she was looking for something specific. The Valeth movement patterns reminded her of something from her childhood. Her grandmother had taught her traditional Korean dances when she was young. The flowing movements, the way dancers circled around each other. The rhythm that seemed random but followed ancient patterns passed down through generations. Computer, show me the mathematical analysis of their flight paths. Numbers and equations filled the screen. The ship's computer had tried to find logical patterns in the alien movements but failed completely. Every algorithm produced different results. The computer's analysis concluded that Valeth tactics were completely random and unpredictable, but Hana knew they weren't random. Her grandmother had taught her that traditional dances looked chaotic to outsiders, but made perfect sense to those who understood the cultural patterns. What if the Valeth were following similar rules that human computers couldn't recognize? She opened a new program and began comparing the alien flight patterns to recordings of traditional human martial arts. Her hands moved quickly across the keyboard as she loaded videos of Taekyeon, the ancient Korean fighting style that emphasized flowing movements and natural rhythm. The results made her heart race. The Valeth ships moved in patterns almost identical to the fundamental forms of traditional human combat. They circled their enemies like martial artists, striking from unexpected angles and flowing around defensive positions like water around rocks. Impossible, she whispered to herself. How could aliens from another galaxy move like ancient human warriors? She ran more comparisons. The similarities weren't exact, but they were too close to be coincidence. The Valeth used space-time distortions to phase between dimensions, but their movement patterns followed the same natural rhythms that humans had discovered through thousands of years of warfare. A new idea began forming in her mind. What if human fighting instincts had evolved to counter exactly these kinds of tactics? What if the seemingly random movements of traditional martial arts were actually sophisticated responses to phase-shifting enemies? Hana pulled up her personal files and found videos of her grandmother performing traditional dances. She watched the elderly woman move with grace and precision, following patterns that had been passed down for centuries. Then she overlaid those movements onto the tactical display showing human ship formations. The contrast was striking. Human military formations were rigid and mathematical, designed by committees and tested in simulations. But traditional combat movements were organic and intuitive, developed through actual life and death struggles where only the most effective techniques survived. Computer, create a new tactical algorithm based on these movement patterns, she instructed. Warning, the computer replied. The requested parameters do not match standard military doctrine. Implementation may violate Federation combat protocols. Override safety restrictions. This is experimental research for tactical analysis. Hana worked through the night, creating new programs that incorporated human instinctive responses instead of calculated strategies. She used pattern recognition algorithms based on traditional martial arts rather than mathematical formulas. The computer protested constantly, warning that the new tactics were illogical and inefficient. But when she ran simulations, the results were extraordinary. Ships using her intuitive algorithms survived much longer against Valeth attacks. They moved unpredictably, responding to threats with the same natural instincts that had kept humans alive for millions of years. That the key breakthrough came when she realized that Valeth phase-shifting technology created microscopic distortions in space-time. These distortions were too small for computers to detect, but they followed patterns that human subconscious minds could recognize and predict. Traditional martial artists had learned to read their opponent's intentions through subtle body language and energy patterns. Human brains were naturally evolved to detect these tiny signals and respond appropriately. What seemed like magic or intuition was actually sophisticated pattern recognition that operated below conscious awareness. Hana's new tactical system used these same principles. Instead of trying to calculate where Valeth ships would appear, It taught human pilots to trust their instincts and respond to subconscious cues. The system encouraged fluid movements and adaptive strategies rather than rigid formations. She tested the algorithms against recorded battle data. In every simulation, ships using intuitive tactics performed better than those following standard doctrine. They avoided more attacks, scored more hits during enemy solid phases, and survived longer in combat situations. This could work, she said to the empty computer core. This could actually work. But she knew that her superiors would never accept these ideas. Commander Park and the other officers believed completely in mathematical precision and proven tactics. They would see her intuitive combat system as dangerous nonsense that put lives at risk. Hana saved her work to a secure partition and encrypted the files. She needed more time to refine the algorithms and gather supporting data. Maybe if she could prove the effectiveness of intuitive tactics through enough simulations, she might convince someone to listen. A soft chime indicated that the night shift was ending. Soon other officers would report to their stations, and the computer core would become busy with routine operations. Hana quickly closed her programs and erased any evidence of her research from the main systems. As she prepared to leave, she noticed something that made her stop. The ship's navigational computer was running diagnostic routines, checking all systems for damage from the recent battle. One of the diagnostic programs was scanning the same partition where she had stored her experimental algorithms. Computer, status of diagnostic scan. Diagnostic complete. Minor irregularities detected in tactical subroutines. Recommend system maintenance at next scheduled opportunity. Hana felt a chill of worry. If the maintenance crew discovered her hidden programs, she would face serious disciplinary action for modifying military systems without authorization. She needed to be more careful about where she stored her research. She returned to her quarters and tried to sleep, but her mind kept working on the problem. Somewhere in the data, she had found the key to fighting the Valeth effectively. Human intuition and traditional combat wisdom could succeed where modern technology had failed. But first, she needed a chance to prove her theories. The human fleet was regrouping after their devastating defeat, preparing for another battle they would probably lose. Time was running out for her to find a way to share her discoveries. As she drifted off to sleep, Hana made a silent promise to her grandmother's memory. The old woman had taught her that traditional wisdom often contained truths that modern people had forgotten. Now those ancient truths might be humanity's only hope for survival against an enemy that seemed unbeatable. The next battle would come soon. When it did, Hana would be ready with weapons the Valeth had never faced before. The fighting spirit and natural instincts of the human race. 3 days after the massacre at New Busan, the human fleet regrouped near the asteroid mining station Omega-7. Only 9 ships remained from the original 15, and most of those bore heavy damage from Valeth weapons. The Resilience had lost 2 decks to energy fire, and half its crew worked around the clock on emergency repairs. Hana stood in the ship's damaged computer core, watching technicians replace burned-out processors and melted memory banks. Sparks flew from exposed wiring while repair crews struggled to restore full functionality to critical systems. The battle had pushed every ship beyond its design limits. "How long until we're combat ready?" Commander Park asked the chief engineer. "At least 48 hours for basic systems, sir," Chief Kim replied while wiping grease from his hands. "The main computer took heavy damage when that energy beam passed through our hull. We're running on backup processors right now." Park nodded grimly. "Do what you can." Intelligence reports indicate the Valeth are massing for another attack. They want to finish what they started. Hana felt her stomach tighten. Another battle using the same failed tactics would mean the complete destruction of the human fleet. She had spent the last 3 days refining her intuitive combat algorithms, but her superiors still refused to consider alternative strategies. The repair work continued throughout the day. Hana helped where she could, running diagnostic tests and checking system connections. As evening approached, most of the crew retired to their quarters for much-needed rest. Only essential personnel remained on duty. At 2300 hours, the Valeth returned. Alarms blared throughout the ship as sensor stations detected multiple contacts emerging from hyperspace. Hana ran to the bridge still wearing her work clothes, her hands stained with machine oil from helping with repairs. 14 Valeth vessels approaching from multiple vectors, Lieutenant Sora reported, her voice tight with fear. They're using the same phase shift technology as before. Admiral Ryu's voice came through the communication system. All ships, battle stations, form up in defensive formation Alpha 7 and prepare to engage. Hana watched the tactical display with growing dread. The human ships moved into the same rigid patterns that had failed so catastrophically 3 days ago. They were about to repeat the same mistakes that had cost so many lives. "Sir," she said to Commander Park, "we should consider alternative tactics. The formation patterns aren't working against phase shift technology." "Officer Lee," Park replied coldly, "we follow Federation doctrine, not experimental theories. Take your position and do your duty." The Valeth approached with casual confidence, their ships flowing through space like deadly dancers. They had learned from the previous battle, and now moved in even more complex patterns that seemed to mock human attempts at mathematical prediction. "All ships, open fire when targets are within range," Admiral Ryu ordered. The human fleet began shooting at the approaching aliens. Laser beams and missile salvos crossed space toward their targets, but most weapons passed harmlessly through transparent enemy hulls. The few hits that connected during solid phases caused minimal damage to superior Valeth shielding. The alien response was swift and devastating. Energy beams lanced out from multiple directions, striking human ships with surgical precision. The destroyer Vigilant took a direct hit to its reactor core and exploded in a ball of superheated plasma. "Vigilant destroyed," Sora reported. "No survivors." Hana gripped her console as the Resilience shook under enemy fire. The ship's damaged systems struggled to maintain basic functions, while Valeth fighters phased through the hull and attacked from impossible angles. Warning lights flashed red as hull breaches appeared in multiple sections. Then disaster struck the ship's computer core. A Valeth energy beam passed directly through the main processing center, cooking electronic circuits and melting memory storage units. Backup systems activated automatically, but they were already damaged from previous battles. The ship's computer network began failing in cascading crashes. "Main computer offline," Chief Kim reported from engineering, switching to emergency backup systems. But the backup computers were also failing. Overloaded circuits sparked and died as the ship's electronic brain shut down piece by piece. Navigation systems went dark, followed by weapons control and tactical displays. In the chaos of system failures, something unexpected happened. Hana's experimental algorithms had been stored in a secondary partition that automatically activated when the main systems crashed. Her intuitive combat program suddenly began running on the ship's navigation and weapon systems. "What's happening to our flight controls?" demanded Commander Park as the Resilience began moving in ways that violated standard procedure. Instead of maintaining rigid formation, the ship started flowing through space like a living creature. It curved around incoming fire and spiraled through Valeth attack patterns with movements that seemed impossible for a military vessel. "I don't know, sir," replied the helmsman. "The ship is responding to commands I'm not giving. It's like the computer is flying itself." Hana realized what had happened. Her hidden programs had integrated with the ship's control systems through the data leak caused by battle damage. The Resilience was now operating according to her intuitive algorithms instead of standard military protocols. The results were immediate and stunning. A Valeth fighter materialized directly in front of the ship, expecting to phase through the human vessel's predictable flight path. Instead, the Resilience twisted away at the last second like a dancer avoiding a partner's embrace. The alien fighter, caught solid during its attack run, flew directly into the ship's point defense lasers. The small craft exploded in a shower of debris and exotic energy, marking the first Valeth kill of the entire war. "Did we just destroy an enemy fighter?" Sora asked in amazement. Before anyone could answer, the ship performed another impossible maneuver. It rolled inverted and dove beneath a Valeth cruiser, just as the alien vessel fired its main weapons. The energy beams passed overhead while the Resilience's dorsal cannons fired upward into the enemy ship's transparent hull. By pure chance, the shots struck during one of the cruiser's brief solid phases. The Valeth vessel staggered under the impact, its hull showing visible damage for only the second time in the war. "How are we doing this?" Park demanded, staring at the tactical display in confusion. The Resilience continued its deadly dance through space, moving with fluid grace that confused and frustrated the Valeth attackers. The alien ships tried to predict the human vessel's course, but their analytical minds couldn't process movements based on intuition rather than calculation. For the first time since the war began, A human ship was not only surviving but actually fighting back effectively. The resilience flowed between enemy formations like water, striking at vulnerable moments and disappearing before return fire could find its mark. "Sir," Hana said quietly, "the ship is operating on experimental tactical algorithms. They're based on traditional human combat patterns instead of mathematical formulas." Park turned to stare at her with wide eyes. "You mean your theories are actually working?" "Yes, sir. The computer is responding to Valeth movements the same way human fighters would respond to opponents in hand-to-hand combat. It's using pattern recognition and instinctive responses instead of calculated predictions." The battle continued, but now the other human ships began to notice what was happening. The resilience was not only surviving but actually damaging enemy vessels, while their own ships continued to suffer under Valeth attacks. "Admiral," Park called through the communication system, "we may have found a solution to the phase shift problem." Word of the resilience's impossible success spread through the human fleet within minutes. Admiral Ryu's voice crackled through the communication system as he watched the tactical displays from his flagship. "Commander Park, explain how your vessel is engaging the enemy so effectively. Our sensors show you've destroyed 3 Valeth fighters and damaged 2 cruisers." Park looked at Hana with a mixture of amazement and confusion. The bridge crew stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. The young officer they had mocked for months was suddenly the most important person in the fleet. "Sir," Hana said into the communication pickup, "the ship is running experimental tactical algorithms based on traditional human combat patterns. Instead of calculated responses, we're using intuitive movement and pattern recognition." There was a long pause before the Admiral replied, "Officer Lee, are you telling me that ancient fighting techniques are more effective than 3 centuries of military science?" "Yes, sir. The Valeth use phase shift technology, but their movement patterns follow natural rhythms that human instincts can predict. Our subconscious minds evolved to counter exactly these kinds of tactics." Another Valeth fighter materialized near the resilience, expecting to catch the human ship in a predictable formation flight. Instead, the vessel twisted away like a striking snake and fired a full spread of missiles during the enemy's brief solid phase. The alien craft exploded in a brilliant flash of exotic energy. "Remarkable," Admiral Ryu murmured. "Can these algorithms be transferred to other ships?" Hana's fingers flew across her console, checking system compatibility. "Yes, sir, but there's a problem. The programs work best when integrated directly into navigation and weapons control. Installation will take time, and the ships will be vulnerable during the upgrade process." The battle raged around them as Admiral Ryu considered the options. Human vessels continued falling to Valeth attacks while the resilience danced through enemy formations like a deadly ghost. Every few minutes, another human ship exploded under alien fire. "All vessels, this is Admiral Ryu," came the decision. "Form defensive perimeter around the resilience. We're going to attempt a battlefield upgrade of our tactical systems." The remaining human ships moved to protect the resilience while Hana worked frantically to adapt her algorithms for different vessel types. Each ship class required modifications to account for size, mass, and maneuverability characteristics. "Upload package ready for the destroyer-class vessels," she reported, transmitting to Defiant and Stalwart now. The 2 destroyers received her programs and began installation procedures. For several dangerous minutes, they were helpless as their computers integrated the new tactical systems. Valeth fighters swarmed around them, but the other human ships provided covering fire. Then something beautiful happened. The destroyer Defiant came alive with fluid grace, rolling away from a Valeth energy beam that should have destroyed it. The ship moved like a dancer, spinning through space with movements that seemed impossible for such a large vessel. Captain Nam Ji-hoon's voice came through the communication system, filled with wonder and excitement. "This is incredible. My ship is responding to threats I haven't even seen yet. It's like the computer can predict what the enemy will do." The Defiant engaged a Valeth cruiser, flowing around the alien vessel's attacks while firing at precisely the right moments. When the enemy ship phased to avoid damage, the destroyer was already moving to a new position, ready to strike when it became solid again. "Upload complete for cruiser-class vessels," Hana announced, transmitting to Honor and Vigilance. One by one, the human ships received her intuitive combat algorithms. Each vessel that completed the upgrade began moving with the same fluid grace as the resilience. They flowed through space like schools of fish, coordinating their movements through instinctive responses rather than calculated formations. The Valeth, who had been winning easily just minutes before, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't understand. Human ships moved in patterns their analytical minds couldn't predict or counter. Weapons that had been useless began finding their marks with deadly accuracy. Lieutenant Sora watched her tactical display with growing amazement. "Sir, we're actually winning. The enemy is falling back toward the asteroid field." The transformation was remarkable to witness. Human vessels that had been clumsy and predictable now moved with organic beauty. They responded to Valeth attacks with the same natural instincts that had kept humanity alive through millions of years of evolution. Commander Park stared at Hana with newfound respect. "Officer Lee, I owe you an apology. Your theories weren't just correct, they've saved the entire fleet." But Hana barely heard him. She was watching the tactical display with growing concern. The Valeth were indeed falling back, but their retreat pattern seemed organized and purposeful. They weren't fleeing in panic, they were regrouping for something bigger. "Sir," she said urgently, "I don't think they're retreating. Look at their formation. They're drawing us toward the asteroid field where their superior numbers will give them an advantage in close combat." Admiral Ryu had reached the same conclusion. "All ships halt advance, maintain current positions and do not pursue the enemy into the asteroids." The Valeth fleet stopped at the edge of the asteroid field and began broadcasting on all frequencies. Their commander's voice was no longer filled with contempt. Now it carried grudging respect mixed with cold anger. "Human vessels, your tactical adaptation is unexpected. We had not anticipated that a primitive species could develop effective countermeasures to our technology so quickly," Admiral Ryu responded with quiet confidence. "Perhaps you underestimated what makes humanity dangerous. We don't just rely on technology, we adapt and overcome." "Adaptation," the alien commander repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, we begin to understand why your species has survived and expanded, despite your obvious technological limitations. You possess something our analytical minds find difficult to process." The communication paused for a moment before continuing. "However, do not assume that one tactical success guarantees victory. We have called for reinforcements from the Valeth home fleet. 50 battle groups are en route to this system." Hana felt her blood turn cold. 50 battle groups meant thousands of Valeth warships, more than enough to overwhelm the human fleet despite their new tactical advantages. "You have won this engagement," the alien commander acknowledged. "But the war is far from over. We will study your new fighting methods and develop appropriate countermeasures." The Valeth fleet began withdrawing toward deep space, leaving the asteroid field empty, except for debris from destroyed fighters. The human fleet had won their first victory, but everyone understood it was just the beginning of a much larger conflict. "All ships, secure from battle stations," Admiral Ryu ordered. "Begin damage assessment and prepare for emergency jump to friendly space. We need to reach Terra Command and share these new tactics with the entire human fleet." As the ships prepared for their journey home, Hana continued refining her algorithms. The Valeth were right about one thing. They would adapt to human tactics just as humans had adapted to theirs. The next battle would require even more sophisticated strategies. But for the first time since the war began, humanity had hope. They had proven that human ingenuity and instinct could overcome seemingly impossible odds. The galaxy was about to learn what made humanity truly dangerous.